Steve Harris from White Maiden and British Lion. You're listening to Andrew McCaskey from Scars and Guitars.
G'day everybody, I'm thrilled to announce that this episode features a chat with the great Jeff Wagner. Now, these days he's an acclaimed author and podcaster, but I knew him as Metal Maniacs editor from 1997 to 2001. Metal Maniacs, if you need reminding, is the greatest extreme metal publication ever. Yes, a very important magazine that was published from the early 90s up until about 2008 or thereabouts. Now, throughout this conversation, Jeff explores shaping the magazine's identity during metal's subgenre diversification, how he maintained underground authenticity, and tackled editorial obstacles and hurdles, such as the mini industry dynamics that were a playback in those days. He reflects on collaborating with writers S. Craig Zahler, the great Mike Greenblatt, who I have had a conversation with before, and I will put a link to that episode in this episode description, and also the bloke that went on to, can we call it big things? Might as well. Blabbermouth. It's unavoidable. My show gets picked up a lot, but Borivoj, and I'm going to butcher your surname here, Bori, but Krgin or Krgin, I think it is. Krgin. I'm sorry, Bori. Elsewhere throughout the conversation, you'll hear a very interesting interaction that Jeff had with Cradle of Filth as they were recording Cruelty and the Beast, the magnum opus, touring with Bruce Dickinson throughout South America. Jeff also shares the most surprising and disappointing figures that he's met and discusses the impact of a recent tragedy in addition to his books and much, much more. All right. This one, I really enjoyed this one. I got to say, it's one thing to have an awareness of somebody for a long time, but it's another thing to meet them, and they're pretty fucking cool as Jeff is. So here he is. Jeff Wagner, former editor of Metal Maniacs.
Andrew.
How are you, mate?
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. I can hear you. I can see you.
Sweet. There you go. Your house resembles mine with a cat in the background there.
Always cats. Yeah.
How many?
3. Did you hear what happened to me?
I read something online, but please go for it.
Well, it's a hard question to answer because we had 5 and we lost 4 in the fire.
Okay.
And she's the survivor from that night. And then we had 2 that we were kind of taken care of out on the front porch. They were kind of these, neighborhood stragglers, these strays. And we kind of have taken them in. So it's 3, but it's a hard question to answer,
Yeah, tragic. I'm sorry to hear, mate.
That was awful. We lost half of our family. I lost a huge part of my record collection, or mostly my CDs. All of my zine and book archive.
God, yeah.
The entire house, we have to tear it down and rebuild. And right now this is a rental. And hopefully we're getting something more permanent in June while our house gets rebuilt. So it's been a nightmare. It's been the worst thing I've ever experienced,
Understandably so. Was it a bushfire situation, was it?
No, it was, it was related to cats. It was related to the 2 cats we've since taken in. They were strays, and we had a little heating pad set out for them because the winter was coming on. It was like late November. Mm-hmm. And that heating pad misfired, just a cheap piece of crap from China, basically. Yeah. And it just, my neighbor actually caught it on video, which is part of our lawsuit. We're definitely going to also be in the middle of a lawsuit with the manufacturer. But it misfired. It just was a piece of crap. And our neighbor got it on video because he has a camera trained on his driveway, which is sort of like next to where that part of the porch was. And he has a camera there because he had vehicle break-ins. And he caught the fire smoking about 11:30 And then by 2:30 in the morning, it erupted. And I woke up to the sounds of, well, just weird fucking sounds like glass breaking. Can't describe the sounds, quite honestly. And I woke up, laid there for 30 seconds going, what the fuck is that? And looked out the front. We had like a covered front porch, and I slept in the room right above that. Saw fire bursting up from the roof of that porch. It was 2:30 in the morning, and woke up, of course, my wife. We grabbed our dog. We went downstairs in a total panic. I mean, I've never panicked in such a way before. It was just like, this fire's coming for us, you know. It was blazing. 2:30 in the morning, blazing. I guess no neighbors or anybody was around to see it, you know, to call anybody. So we got out in the nick of time and opened some doors for some cats, and only one got out. We just didn't even have time to grab anybody because it was already raging pretty hard. And then we just had to get the hell out of there, get into an ambulance and watch our house burn, and just get reports on, hey, we found this cat. Hey, we found this cat. So yeah, it was pretty awful. You know, something we didn't ask for. It just completely changed our life on November 21st. Just everything's been different since, like every aspect of life. But
yeah, I'm sorry to hear, mate. So 6 months, mate. I can understand why it's front of mind and very much a present thing.
Still is. Yeah, it's going to be a while, man, because there's grief, there's loss, there's all this new stuff we got to do in terms of building a new house. Thankfully, insurance has been good with that regarding coverage.
Yeah.
But it's just every aspect of life's different now. But yeah, I'm resuming. I've got a Voivod book coming out this year, if you want to talk about that. But anyway, we'll get started, do your thing. And I'm really glad to have you contact me, because yeah.
Oh, it's a pleasure, mate. I'll kick things off by saying that I'm a long-time reader. I don't think I've ever said that to anybody else except for Mike Greenblatt. There you go. Who we had on the show. Your former editor-in-chief or what have you there. And Metal Maniacs was the opinion former. It was the thing that made the greatest impression on me as a young metal fan in a boarding school, by the way. And reading your words were like hearing victories from across the sea. That's what they were like. You're hearing about bands that I'd listened to on the 3 Hours of Power, which was a show on a radio station called Triple J here with Costa Zulio, who's magnificent, similar to you actually. And listen to these things in a boarding school where nobody listened to. I mean, they're from the bush, right? A lot of these blokes, they listen to Garth Brooks and all this Slim Dusty and all this shit. And when you're into extreme metal, Morbid Angel and Cannibal Corpse, and you don't even say anything, you just get called a Westie headbanger or a bogan, so you really can't talk about it too much. But listening to the radio station, 3 Hours of Power, and then reading first and foremost Metal Maniacs, which you and Mike had such a heavy hand in forming my opinion about what it is that I do. And I've been doing this podcast for 8 years or so now, and I've had conversations with just about everybody that I've wanted to, and then some, including Steve Harris and Adrian Smith, which I could never have dreamed that I would have. But that seed was planted courtesy of you and your writing, mate. I just wanted to say that up top.
Well, I mean, thank you. That's just incredibly grateful for that type of little role I might have had in your life. It's humbling, because I still get, not only you, but I still get other people every now and then coming up to me wanting to talk about Maniacs, not wanting to talk about my books, not wanting to talk about anything else I've ever done, but Maniacs, which is great, because who knew, right? I mean, who knew my tenure from early 97 to mid 2001 seems kind of like a 5 short years to me in my life. It was my dream job. But who knew that anybody would remember, but people certainly seem to remember. And that's great, man. I know I had an impact at that magazine. I know I came in and changed it for what I thought was the better. But to have somebody like yourself halfway across the world remember it so fondly, man, it just makes me feel really good. Thank you.
Yeah, it was your tenure as sub-editor-in-chief there that had the most impact on me, because I left school in 1995, did my final year, and dropped out of university, as so many of us do. And then what next? Who knows? You're just a young man you get spat out the other side of it, and you're sort of in a wasteland. And heavy metal becomes your beacon. And reading, especially at that time, young people, when I say young people like to reimagine the past. Sometimes some people reinvent the past. But for those of us that were around back then, we endured new metal. We endured,
yes, of course.
Yeah, and the grunge thing was one thing, and I quite like a lot of alternative music. That wasn't an issue, but new metal was something pernicious, I'm going to call it. The way that Metal Hammer, Kerrang, and some of the Euro mags wrapped themselves around it, just abandoned heavy metal completely. I'm talking about black metal, extreme metal more broadly, whereas you and Terrorizer, the writers at Terrorizer, became the two magazines globally that were focusing on that outside of the zines, and zines in Australia were very hard to get. So after all of that, I'd like to ask you, how did you, during your tenure, I feel as though you were very intentful in defining the magazine's identity or soul at a time when metal was fragmenting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see the changes. I'd been following metal since I was 13, 14, which I'm 55 now. So that puts me at around 83, 84 when I really, really got into it. Maybe even earlier with Accept and Iron Maiden and Priest. But I could see the changes that were happening in the mid 90s. I didn't think all of them were terrible. For me being in the US, I thought, man, these bands coming along like Opeth and Catatonia, and I mean, all that mid-90s stuff, obviously all the black metal stuff. Just so much was coming out of Europe that I thought was fantastic, and a really new plateau for the genre that I've been loving and following for so long. I felt like these were Sentence is another one, with Amok and all that. Like, I felt like these were the bands that were kind of like doing something new and interesting. And then at the same time, you had the big four just taking a shit everywhere. Like, I wasn't a big fan of Load, although I will defend that album to some degree. But yeah, the big four weren't putting down anything of note. And as far as new metal went, it sort of had this ripple effect, I think, of people cutting their hair, which I don't have a problem with that. But all it did was signal a change. Like, oh, wow, like that left and right, everybody's cutting their hair. Things are changing. It just was a signal of change. And then, of course, the lack of guitar solos, bands started to choose not to do guitar solos. Creator was one of them, infamously. It was just a weird time. And so, yeah, fragmenting all over the place, and then kind of being, in some ways, attention-wise, with the media taken over by the Korns and the Limp Bizkits and all, whatever the hell it was out at that time. And I came into Maniacs when Mike G was, I think, good-heartedly putting in Korn and Marilyn Manson. And I was of the opinion that, look, we can't do that. We got to leave that for Metal Edge. Mm-hmm. Metal Edge was the sister magazine at the same publisher, run by Paul Gargano. I felt like, well, those are the mainstream bands, and Metal Edge exists to cover mainstream bands, right? That's kind of its unstated mission, I think, is to cover the popular stuff. So why don't we immediately shift and just never cover these Marilyn Manson, Korn, these interlopers, and let's stick with what Metal Maniacs really should be and has built itself up to be. And I think I immediately had an impact on him in my argument. And that's when, very early on in my tenure, that's when Mike gave me the keys of the kingdom to just like, hey, man, you're my expert. You're my lifer. Mm-hmm. Let's do this, So we just went balls out. We didn't care about what was popular, what we should or shouldn't cover. I think we knew. And I set about doing it. If that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. I guess I framed it as a statement just to see where you'd take it. And I'm really glad you took it that way, because the question that I have for you was, did you feel moments, even though you've articulated so well the vision that you had for the magazine, and you and Mike were such a great team, evidently, but were there moments where your fight where you felt as though you had to fight to preserve the vision that you just articulated against external pressures like trends or the big one, publisher and advertising expectations?
No, because we were very lucky. And I feel like even 20, 25 years later, I'm dispelling a certain notion, which is that Metal Maniacs would take ad money for coverage. We never did that. I can say in my tenure, the 5 years I was there, nobody from above, and I'm talking about above Mike G, came to us and said, hey, we're getting advertising from this certain place. May not be your cup of tea, but we need to get them coverage. There's nothing like that happened. If there was a band like a Machine Head, even, who were always on the, they moved into nu metal pretty quickly. But if we covered them, it was because somebody on the staff wanted to cover them. If somebody comes to us with a passion for it and an argument to cover Machine Head, I would do it. Mike did cover Korn once in my tenure because he wanted to do it. None of it was beholden to advertising. I'm really proud of that. I'm glad we didn't have that. I don't think I could have dealt with it, quite honestly. I think I probably would have quit before my time if I was being pressured to cover anything for ad revenue. We just did what we wanted to. And, sometimes we'd get ads from a certain label or band, and they would receive a bad review in the magazine. We also didn't worry about that too much. We had to be very honest. We had to be I wanted to be like a fanzine. I always thought Metal Maniacs, even before I was there, when I bought it, I always thought it was more like a glorified fanzine.
Yeah.
Every writer has a voice and every writer has an opinion. And Catherine Ludwig, God rest her soul, she would let anybody say anything, and opinion-wise. She just had an open forum. She created an open forum there that you don't often get in a large mainstream magazine. So I want to keep that going. So that's, again, I hope that answers your question. But I'm glad that we weren't beholden to that, and we could just cover whatever we wanted. We didn't feel the pressure.
Yeah, copy. Yeah. Hey, something just come to mind. Catherine had the what do we want to call it? The standoff with Glenn Benton. It was her, wasn't it? But it was and she would censor things, but it would just be her ethics, right? Yeah,
and that's fair too. An editor should put their stamp on their magazine, and that includes who not to cover as well as it does who to cover. And she was a big animal rights person. I can completely align with that. I've definitely done a lot of things in my life, whether it's diet or other things, rescue, whatever. I'm all on board with that. I don't know that I would have censored anyone. I don't think that's right, but that's her prerogative. And that was an interesting time.
But you dug up the hatchet, didn't you? That was you that did that, or if I'm not mistaken. I'm going on my 30-year
back into the magazine.
Yeah.
I had talked to whoever their publicist was. I think they might have been at Earache at that time. But I talked to them and I said, look, it's a new regime here. Mike's kind of neutral. I'm also neutral. I'm not going to condone what everybody does in this magazine who's a musician. But if I were to censor anybody, any musician who did something unsavory in their past and not cover them, well, we wouldn't be covering very much. These people are human and they're going to make mistakes and they're going to do some shit that we don't agree with. But this is about music. Let's cover the music. And I did try to unbury the hatchet. I don't know if Glenn got the memo because I was at a Deicide show in Coney Island High in Manhattan during this time while I was at the magazine, and he did a shout out to Maniacs that wasn't very positive. It was kind of a slam at Maniacs. I think just because he was back in New York and he knew it, and maybe he figured somebody from Maniacs would be there. Maybe he saw my name on the list. So I don't know if he knew I was even the one that unburied it, but I took it anyway because I know he was bitter about the cap, and I didn't take it personally, but it was kind of humorous.
I think that's a badge of honor, mate, to be bloody paid out on by Glenn Benton, by the way.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Something else, and you've already touched on it, and I'm speaking for myself, but I know I've had lots of conversations over the years, particularly with musicians who were fans back then and young people back then who came through. We're just so grateful that you held the line that you did on the Marilyn Manson thing, especially because to the average person, Marilyn Manson is heavy metal or extreme metal, you know, the average person on the street I'm talking about. But you worked hard to draw a line between his shtick and what real extreme metal was all about. And I read your editorials about all of that and the way you talk about that the example that he sets could be done by almost any one of the bands in here. And that's why we write about the bands that we write about, these bands that actually, in most cases, mean it too. So I actually have a feeling, mate, you were the person that held the fort on that front to ensure that the Marilyn Manson thing didn't come across and become associated with extreme metal.
Oh, I was. And I was, I was always tussling with Mike about it, because Mike would always, not always, he would often lean mainstream or lean toward just throwing caution in the wind and covering whatever. I did feel a lot of freedom at Maniacs, but at the same time, I think he felt a different kind of freedom, which was like, I will cover Korn if I want to, and I lost some battles. But yes, mostly I was just trying to say, look, we have a limited amount of pages every month. We have amazing distribution. Our job is to cover what's out there, and let's try to give some ink to bands that may not get covered anywhere else by any magazine like this. And it was like, Marilyn Manson's getting covered in Metal Edge already. Marilyn Manson's getting covered in all these big magazines already. What are we doing? This was never the stated mission, I don't think, of Maniacs. And he would often come my way. I have to give Mike G a shit ton of credit. Because he had a tough job. He'll tell you himself that he's not, say, a lifer, quote unquote. He likes a very broad span of music. A lot of it is older rock, or a lot of it's country, or a lot of it's, I mean, he listens very widely. So do I. But I think it's telling that he called me his lifer, I was the guy that would help guide him to where the magazine should have gone, because he was getting the letters. He was getting the angry letters when they put Marilyn Manson on the cover before I got there. And I knew what I was stepping into. I was like, this magazine is actually less popular than it used to be. I knew that it was at a certain kind of low. And I think Mike needed direction. And I think Mike recognized he needed direction and needed a lifer in there. That's how I basically got the job, was when I showed interest. He he thought, oh, this guy will be perfect. So he gave me a lot of freedom, and I did absolutely help keep things out that should have been out, and brought things in that I felt should have been brought in. And I even, not tooting my own horn, I'm just, what I didn't see happening in previous editorships, no matter if it was Catherine or that short time with Alicia Morgan or Mike, was a lot of traditional metal, which, back then in 95, 96, and then when I got there in 97, there were things like Nocturnal Rites happening. All these bands that were like taking traditional metal and updating it only slightly. They weren't, and that was a new thing, actually. People forget that. In 96, 97, it was really weird to have a Hammerfall or to have traditional metal bands, not taking it heavier. They stayed traditional and melodic. Gamma Ray had been going for a while, and I thought, these bands are essentially underground in the U.S. This is something we also should be covering. So I brought a lot of more traditional type of metal into the magazine, and I think that was well received. It seemed like.
Oh, absolutely. And just to underline the point, I guess my point was more broader too. I didn't just mean Metal Maniacs. I think you did that for all extreme metal fans as well. Between what you did and what the Terrorizer editors did, they didn't have any of that other shit in there, like the new metal or the Marilyn Manson, or it was very cynical coverage, which it frankly deserved, because so much of it was about record company hype and about the way the media needed to jump on board the next big thing, and the way magazines, to your point earlier, took cash for coverage. And that was Rolling Stone. That was absolutely, still is, as it's been going on since time immemorial, since the 50s or what have you. But to have somebody independent, and the key the key way I want to frame this is I could buy it in the news agency. I didn't have to go down to the weird little heavy metal store my mother would never take me to. I could get it at the railway news agency. Yours and Terrorizer sitting right next to each other alongside of Guitar World and Bass Player. I'd pick up all four, and Guitar for the Practicing Musician whenever you could pick that up. You pick up 4 or 5 of these things and they were just this doorway into this other universe whilst you're trying to figure out your life. And so many of us were part of that. But I've got another question for you just about the coverage side of things, which is that were there ever any bands or stories that you deeply wanted to champion, but you couldn't due to, we'll just call it space constraints, reader expectations, or even industry politics?
Wow. Not that I recall. And I think that's just a reflection of the freedom that I had. Like, I remember when the band Alchemist of all bands, the Australian band came across my radar. Yeah. They weren't even close to being on Relapse yet, which was their first real into the United States, I suppose. Just always available on import, really obscure. But I loved them, man. I flipped for their Promo 95 demo. And I was like, as soon as I got to Maniacs, whatever they were putting out at that time, it might have been Spiritech. I'm like, I'm giving this band a page. And I didn't have to ask anybody, you know what I mean? And neither did Mike. And then, we'd have writers come to us with what things they were into. I don't think I ever ran into those roadblocks that you're talking about or that you asked about, thankfully. Yeah, thankfully. I might remember something after we're done talking and I'll let you know, but I don't recall having too much dilemma with stuff like that at all.
Well, so when you think back over your whole tenure, that 5 years or so that you were there, the headline items, if you like, so the issues or so, the coverage that you gave, can you highlight some of those ones that you felt were special for you personally?
Oh, God. Well, this was back in a time when record labels were still sending journalists overseas or across country to cover things, shelling out money for, and that was, you could look at that as money for coverage, but it was always stuff. I was always making sure that it was stuff that we would have covered anyway. You know what I mean? Nobody was being bought. And it was easy. It was a slam dunk, to get, hey, we're going to send you to Birmingham to drink and be in the studio with Cradle of Filth. Like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. That was memorable. I got very drunk with Nick Barker, who pushed me into a cab that night. And I don't like to talk about, being crazy drunk as any sort of highlight, but it happened that night. Oh, no. And previous to that, after the interview I did with Danny and Nick, the guys in Napalm Death and Benediction showed up at this metal bar in Birmingham. We're all screaming, Ozzy Osbourne Suicide Solution at the top of our lungs. And I'm like, how did I get here? Because I'm just this, I'm this kind of this super fan of the bunch. And I'm like, this is amazing, So that was great. I mean, being in front of Rob Halford and him being so gracious. I mean, he's a total hero, probably my favorite metal vocalist of all time. And I adore him all the way back to Rock and Rolla in terms of his voice and that band. And sitting in front of him was not only great, but when the article came out, getting emails from him about how much he thought of the piece, that kind of stuff just blows me away and sustains me to this day, stuff like that, sitting in front of Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler. I brought my Sabotage 1975 tour book. Not that I was at that tour, but I acquired one at some point. Had them sign it. I've never been a big autograph person, but I thought when in the presence of Iommi and Butler, you just be a fan. And I was in a room alone with them for 45 minutes. It was, it's fantastic. Just that kind of stuff. Just meeting these people, having rapport with them, having them be so welcoming. And of course, I'm in a position where they're going to be welcoming. Who knows how they might have treated me if I was just a snot-nosed kid off the street bugging them. But Dio was very kind. I mean, just kind of meeting people, and certainly a lot of the travel. I went down to Brazil with Bruce Dickinson when he was on the Accident of Birth era. Adrian Smith. I had, I ate sushi with those guys. I traveled with those guys. I went on the, we left the hotel to go to some like TV taping. where they met up with the Scorpions, like old friends, and that was kind of cool to be a fly on the wall to see that. But as we're leaving the hotel, the kids in Brazil were so fanatical, like Beatlemania fanatical, and I hadn't experienced that before. But because he was part of Maiden at some point, it was just like, Bruce. They were waiting for him outside the hotel. We'd get into the van, Beatlemania style, be swarmed by kids. They'd throw little pebbles at the window. And I thought that was violent until somebody on the crew said, oh, no, they're just trying to get eye contact. If they can throw a rock at the window, they're not trying to break it. But if Bruce will look out of, I don't know, fear, and they get eye contact, that makes their whole life. You know what I mean? So shit like that was just, it became surreal at some point with the travel and with who I'm hanging out with, whether in Europe or South America or the US. So just a lot of pinch me moments, as a fan, and countless ones. And that was fun. That was fun. I knew then that I better savor that. I felt like the winds were already changing in the industry. And maybe if I had been doing this 15, 20 years later, that wouldn't be happening. I just felt like it seems like those days are going to be over soon where labels have that kind of money to do that kind of thing. A lot of great memories there. Yeah, probably fill a book.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you do capture that at some point too. But I don't know if you checked out the show, there's about 21, 22 interviews with former Cradle members that I've done, some present members, but
I have noticed. That's cool.
But you were a fly on the wall during their most integral period. Just let's face it, when Stuart was leading the band. And what were your impressions of the band in the studio back then?
Well, that was the Cruelty and the Beast era. I did feel for sure. I mean, in fact, when I got into Birmingham, the first real interaction I had with Cradle was brief time in the studio playing back one of the songs. And then we retired up to some other spot in the studio and they just got super high. I don't know what they had. We were smoking, but I got crazy high with them. It felt to me like Danny was definitely already starting to lead. And I think he always had been. I don't know the nuts and bolts of their later history. I haven't followed them too much simply because I haven't loved a lot of what they've done in later years. But obviously he's the only original member. He's the last man standing. They've had just a revolving door of musicians at this point. I think he's done really well by Cradle in the sense of keeping the intent that they've always had pretty front and center. But my impression was that it was his band. Even during the interview with him and Nick, it felt like Danny was the one who was going to be guiding the ship from here on out. I think that was a moment in their history where they did start to become less of a band and more of Danny's project. I don't know if I'm way off, and if you as a Cradle fan can speak to that or counter that.
I think I tuned out as soon as I heard Midian, and I tuned out. I was ready to tune out when Nick and Stuart left and Les left, and I absolutely tuned out the moment I heard Midian. That was it. I just knew that it was gone. It was over. So that goes back to 2000, and I've gotten friendly.
That's funny. I remember that record was Was that the follow up to Cruelty?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I remember hearing Midian and going, I don't know. This isn't their best one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're cut from the same cloth, and that's what I try to tell people. People who were around back then know what was up. A lot of people that have come afterwards, I'm not knocking younger fans or people who weren't around back then. Far from it. I encouraged them. But you and I were there, and we saw the transition. Stuart introduced new waves of British heavy metal through a black metal lens through Cradle of Filth, and they were on the precipice to become something magical, and then it all just shat itself. And they became Danny and the Filths after that. And
right.
I'm actually talking quite a bit to Paul Ryan at the moment. So we've become friendly, and he's a tremendous fella. They're all good blokes, I've got to say. All of the ex-members are fantastic fellas. Even, when I say even, gosh, Paul Allender's a tremendous fella too, but he's just been burnt by the whole bloody thing. And now he drives trucks near you. Well, maybe not near you, but in North America, if you can believe it.
Really?
So, yeah, he's driving.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Big rigs around Milwaukee or something, the Mid-East, the Midwest. So,
all right, yeah, amazing.
Yeah. But you had an eyewitness And so your commentary here is informed and actually very relevant. So if it's okay with you, I'm writing the Chronicles of Filth at the moment. It'll make that, because you were the guy on the ground who had probably the most informed opinion outside of anybody to see what was going on. And that commentary about you noticing the pattern changing, or maybe just Faye Wolven coming in, the manager, and then Danny stepping up. And this is the Danny and the Filths. No coincidence that it all happened when the Marilyn Manson thing came in, selling, lots of money associated with that, and Stuart and poor old Nick and Les. But Stuart's no longer with us, mate. We're forced out, and they were the heart and soul of that band at that time.
Yeah. I was surprised to me that Nick ever left that band. I thought he was pretty foundational in their sound as well, and a great guy. Great guy. Had a great time with him. Honestly, I had a good time with Danny. I think there was a little bit of distance there, but I just think that's how he is. But he was a lot of fun too. I mean, he was right there with us, shouting Ozzy songs and Saxon songs. It was, it was. Look, I had really good memory with both of them for a couple of days there in Birmingham. I was, really grateful for the experience, and I'm grateful that I got to go cover what was a very good album. Because again, like you, I think I kind of started to turn off after that.
Yeah,
just kind of didn't like the music.
No, it just went. They just became another grinding death band with a bit of a black metal influence after that. Well, riff-oriented still, identifiably riff-oriented, because Paul Allender was in the band. But after that, it was all over as far as I was concerned. So that does hint at something else, and I'd love to ask you, if you can share it, who was the most disappointing person you met?
You know what? I hate to say this, but I will. I can name him, and Johan Edlund from Tiamat, who I love his music. Yeah. Wild Honey is one of the greatest albums of all time, in my opinion. Yes. I love Deeper Kind of Slumber. I love the stuff that came before, obviously Astral Sleep and Clouds, all that. But I interviewed that guy 3 different times, 2 times for my fanzine before I was at Maniacs. And I didn't use those interviews because he gave nothing. And yeah, maybe the onus is on the interviewer to pull it out and to just keep working on it. But I just felt like at a loss. I was like, there's nothing I can get out of this guy. And then when Tiamat headlined Dynamo Festival on the Deeper Kind of Slumber era, it was a big moment for them. And I was over there to cover various things, the festival itself, a couple bands that were playing, and Tiamat included. And I sat down with Johan, and it was earlier in the day of their headlining gig, and I think he might have been just, I don't know, extremely nervous. Same thing though, so distant, so hard to get anything out of. It made me wonder why. I know he's the main guy in Tiamat, but it made me wonder why they put him up as the guy being interviewed, because it was giving me nothing. And I don't know. I've talked to other people. I actually talked to somebody recently who met him because they played a show. They played a festival fairly recently, and I don't think they play live a lot these days. And he said, yeah, Johan seemed completely out of it, just not all there. And I thought, oh, that's too bad. I wonder what's happened to him. He was just one of these people I couldn't get anything out of it. I tried 3 times, I cobbled a piece together out of it, but it was hard. And so he was kind of disappointing. I sat in front of Yngwie Malmsteen. I thought that would be either disappointing or scary. He was perfectly fine. Again, I'm in a position where people should probably be kind to me because I can turn it around on them pretty quick. Yeah. So he was pretty kind. So I think Johan's the one. I did meet a couple people that I probably wouldn't call out by name. Mm-hmm. But these were musicians who were sort of up and coming. Most people don't know who they are anymore. And I just felt that they were a little too big for their britches, that they deserve bigger coverage in the magazine than what I would ever give them. I think there was I'm thinking of 2 very different people, but I could never name them because they're still around.
There you go. Doesn't sound
Sorry.
like no, that's all good. No, and you have your own agency with these things. I appreciate your answer so far, but it doesn't sound like you had the pleasure of interviewing bloody Rex from Pantera. Then, if the bloke from Tiamat was your least favorite, because I've got to say, mate, he was the hardest person I ever interviewed.
Which guy?
Rex from Pantera.
Oh, Rex. Oh, wow. No, I never did. He wasn't good, huh? He wasn't giving.
Oh, well, look, I'm a bass player. I'm a bass player who plays guitar, but I'm a bass player first and foremost, so you can only imagine where Rex sits in my pantheon of all-time greats, particularly because he played against played alongside the Iconoclast and Dimebag, but didn't want to talk about Pantera and opened up the interview with, if this is going to be another heavy metal interview, I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, well, I feel like saying, well, fuck you. You know,
what business does he think he's in? What?
Yeah.
It's weird, man.
Got nothing.
It's like talking to somebody from Goodyear, and they're like, "If this is another tire interview, I'm not doing it."
Yeah, and you know what? I've been vocal about it too. People have sent me direct messages saying, "How dare you defile my bass hero?" and all this shit. And I'm like, well, fuck off. At the end of the day, I've got to. I do this because I love doing it. And if someone's a prick, then I'm going to say that they're a fucking prick. And I heavily edited the interview, so it is available out there if anybody wants to check it out. But I took all of the negative stuff out, and then I think I was interviews where I wasn't sure, where I was getting a really hard time. I had this trick of just a 5 bucket list questions that I'd give to them, and one of them was describe yourself in a word, and I think he said polite, and I was like, holy shit, really?
After all this. Yeah. So, you know, I can think of one guy that I'll name, not to just drag him through the mud. I think others have done that pretty well for me, but Chris Barnes. I reviewed a 6 Feet Under EP shortly after I got there. I probably shouldn't have, but this was a time where I was still trying to figure out my place at Maniacs, and Mike would give me basically assignments. Like I wasn't picking what I wanted to review yet. I'm talking the first couple issues is all. He'd just give me something and I'd be like, I'd have to say, okay, this was a new job. I didn't know, you know what I mean? So he gives me a 6 Feet Under EP. I was not into the first 6 Feet Under. And I'm a huge fan of all that death metal that came out, or a lot of the death metal that came out back in the day. Was, you know, picking it up back then. Was never a huge Cannibal Corpse fan. So, you know, and I still am not to this day. So, although I love Alex Webster's playing, I have to say that. But yeah, so it was the wrong EP to give me. I thought it was shit. I've always thought 6 Feet Under were pretty much shit. And I called it that way because we were an honest magazine. We were encouraged to be honest. And I gave it basically a bad review, or I should say just an honest review. And then he got back to me. I can't remember if it was by email or letter back then. But he said, he had all kinds of problems with the review. And then he said something like, reviews to be effective should be objective. And I'm like, do you know what the word objective means? That would be the most boring fucking magazine. This is a death metal band. They have growling vocals. They have detuned guitars. There's your objective review for every single one. You know what I mean? Like objective? I don't think he used the word right. I don't think he knew his vocabulary very well. And I thought, what an idiot. You know, I mean, no, there are going to be no objective reviews here. This is Metal Maniacs. We speak our mind. It's what we've always done. It's what they've always done before me. You know what I mean? No thanks. So he didn't care for me. And I think there was another run-in with him just over email and letter. Yeah. It's too bad, but whatever. I also remember getting a very angry call from Glenn Tipton out of the blue. Shortly after I got there, I was assigned to review his Baptism of Fire solo album. I didn't care for it. I was pretty let down by it. And this is a guy I absolutely worship. I mean, who doesn't? But I mean, I'm a huge Priest fan. I think he's just so fantastic with all he's done on guitar throughout their various eras. But I slagged off his solo album. I mean, it was not a great review for him. And I'm sitting there one day at my office, phone rings. You know what? I didn't have caller ID. Certainly had never talked to him before. I pick it up. Jeff Wagner, Metal Maniacs. Hey, it's Glenn Tipton. And I'm not going to try to do a British accent because I'm terrible at it. But and I was like, Glenn Tipton, holy shit. And then instantly realized,
Right.
he's not calling. Yeah, but he was pretty adamant that he very much disagreed with my review. He felt I stepped over the line in saying something. One of the songs or something was described as he vomited forth something. Not exactly positive sort of review. And he told me how he felt, but then he was super cool about it. Like he's like, but I understand, man. You're a fan. You got your opinion. I just wanted to reach out. I wanted to let you know that, Priest is going to be touring again soon. And when we're in town, I'd love to have a wine with you. I'm like, let's do that, And we did that when they rolled around next on Jugulator. So, yeah, that was kind of cool. This shit would happen a lot. I'd get phone calls from King Diamond telling me, hey, man, we just finished this Metallica Monster Magnet thing in Europe, like, fucking hell, King Diamond's got my number, surreal. Yeah. It's all surreal because I had gone down to Texas to cover their 9 album. And so, we were plugged into each other, and he would keep in touch with me. So yeah, crazy times.
Yeah, well, you did, just talking about Chris Barnes, I remember for a fact you did him a real solid, because drawing on a very old memory here, but this happened, I know it did because I remember reading it. You'd done an interview with Chris and he'd slagged off the Cannibal Corpse guys. In between you doing the interview and going to press, they'd made up and you made a decision not to print his comments about the Cannibal Corpse guys. Does that ring a bell?
It wouldn't have been me. I never interviewed Corpse. It could have been Mike. It could have been another writer. And then we took it as editors, because we'd edit all the stories that would come in. Maybe we made that decision. I'm sorry. I don't remember that at all.
I remember that well. Yeah. That was a moment where I'm very big on deontological ethics, and you, as a magazine, you had very forthright deontological principles around that, and that do no harm. And, offer an opinion, but if someone says to you, I don't want these words printed, because of course they are at each other's throats there for years. And who knows how things would have splintered after that. They're grown men. They would have figured it out, of course. I'm not suggesting tragic would have happened, but I'm simply saying that you elected not to be at as a magazine, as an editorial, not to be at the center of a shitstorm in that one there. And that was the first time I ever remember reading that. And here's the thing, I'm a journalist, and that's always in the back of my mind about things too. I just wanted to share that with you. I did some interviewing out west during some floods. People lost everything. And look, when it's a tragic story, I share the article with the person that's affected and say, are you good to go with this? Have I represented it? Or the word I use is, have I captured your voice accurately? And you know what, mate? In every single instance, they come back and say, yes, you have, because I've got a recording and I don't make anything up. But it's just that care factor. And I love that about the magazine.
Yeah, I think the magazine did have that ethic, certainly before I got there. I also never really liked that sensationalist approach to journalism that certain UK magazines have and still do, where it's all about, who slept with who or who took what drugs. And I mean, it's just ad nauseum. They won't stop with that shit. And like, for me, all music writing is more interesting when it's about the music. I don't care for a whole lot of the gossip stuff. I also don't want to put people in a bad light just because I don't like their music. Like, I don't want to be vindictive. And I did see some of the stuff that was happening with Deicide and Corpse in the Ludwig era, and I didn't want to be a part of that. I have my own personal politics, but I don't want to bring it into the magazine to the degree that it changes the coverage or it denies a band discussion of their music. We're here to discuss the music. There's plenty to discuss, man. I had a friend visit me recently, and we were sitting there talking, and like at the end of the night, he's like, man, we just never get tired of talking about music, do we? I said, not really. It's fascinating enough that you don't need all that extra sensationalistic bullshit to fuel the magazine. So I definitely did my part in trying to keep as much of that stuff out as I could. So that was, a kind of an unwritten directive that we had for ourselves. So whether, your example of the Cannibal Corpse Barnes thing, like, I'm sure we did that in other instances too, to just kind of keep it music focused, music directed, not try to drag anybody through the mud for the sake of selling a few extra copies and splashing it on the front page of, who said what about whom. I don't care for that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of good English magazines out there too, but man, I've read a lot of the English press. I don't know why it's England either. That is the worst at that, but they love some. I mean, I'll call it out. Classic rock. I was, I lost my zine archive in the fire 5.5 months ago, and although I lament that, I've just had to learn to let things go. But I had a friend give me a big stack of magazines he'd had over the years. Just, I've got a lot of donations, whether it's music or shirts or whatever. And this guy gave me a bunch of magazines, which I'm really grateful for. But in that stack of magazines was all these classic rocks from like 2010 era, aughts, a little later into the teens. I'd never really read it. And I'm reading through these things, man. It's just so sensationalistic. You wonder if anybody's listening to the actual music and going to talk about the music sometime soon. It becomes very gossip raggy. And it's just a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where you can choose to go the sensationalistic route and talk about Steven Tyler's drug habits yet again. Or you could talk about how great early Aerosmith was. I'd rather hear the latter. You know what I mean? I'd rather hear much more about the latter and the music itself. To me, it's an endless well of things to discuss and celebrate. So, I don't need to get into that personal crap. I don't buy it. I'm not into it.
That said, it's been fascinating to watch over the past. It's been 25 years or something now, but Borivoj runs the world's biggest metal news aggregation site by a country bloody mile, which there's no site even compares to Blabbermouth. Yep. Even Facebook pales in comparison. The social media sites pale in comparison. But he's a Metal Maniacs alumni. But I think our conversation may get picked up by, that's the irony, may get picked up. Most of my stuff does if it's with somebody who's signed or, got a profile or what have you. But, of course, you don't see a dollar out of it. But his site is all about the most scandalous comment imaginable in many instances. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward stuff like such and such. I did an interview with Kip Winger, wants to write, maybe we'll write an autobiography, that sort of thing. But it's usually someone slagging off on somebody else that makes the Blabbermouth headline or some sort of tension and conflict headline. There you go. That's what I'm searching for there. But did you have any hint when you were working with Borry that it was going to end, he was going to go down that route?
I mean, I'm not surprised he has. I respect Borry so much. I haven't had anything to do with him directly lately, although his wife, Heather, is somebody I know and worked with in the past. And she reached out after the fire and was very, very kind and sweet and sent a message from Borry. So I think the world of those people. I'm not surprised, though. And I'll say this publicly because I just feel like he always enjoyed controversy and stirring things up. And I think he did, even early on when he had his fanzine and all through his writing tenure, I think he gravitated toward that. Plus, he was a brutally honest guy. He was one of those heroes of mine where I might not have agreed with him, but I was like, man, that dude is brutally honest. And I like that. I appreciate honesty in this sort of journalism and this world that we're in, right? I want it straight. I want to know, so no, I'm not really surprised because I feel like he skewed toward that sort of thing naturally. Do you know what I mean? He could be a bit of a cantankerous personality in person. I had something with him once where he, I think rather innocently, had insulted a friend of mine at a show. And I had to have some more, and it's like, it's fine, man. It's his personality. And I wouldn't want him to change for anything. And I think what he's doing with Blabbermouth, I don't know if it's for me so much, but I give him credit for creating this thing that is now an institution, for better or for worse. Like I was talking to the guys in Voivod, one of the guys in Voivod, and he said something about this whole thing with their ex-bassist Blackie. And then he said something like, but I didn't want to start a Blabbermouth war. So Blabbermouth is this thing that, is bigger than itself. Now we're talking about, I don't want to start a Blabbermouth war. You know what I mean? Like, It is what it is, and he's done great with it. I think he's probably making really good money from the ad revenue and the hits and all this. To answer your question again, no, not surprised.
No, it answers it really well. Yeah, look, he's obviously a friend, and I would never expect you to throw shade in a friend, that's for sure. But yeah, it's been fascinating to watch Blabbermouth, which was bolted onto the Roadrunner website initially, and then it became shitloads bigger than that, and it outgrew that. And he was the first person that I'm aware of anywhere, forget about heavy metal, but just understood what the power of the internet could deliver.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like he's the metal TMZ, you know, more power to him. I guess he found a niche that needed to be filled, because if it didn't need to be filled, there wouldn't be anybody following it, but enough people apparently follow it, you know? And, so that's cool. I'm not against people stirring the pot like that. I may not follow it, but I think it's cool. Freedom of the press, right?
Yeah, he's just in his own way, he's a provocateur. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I said, I think he always had been. So again, I'm not surprised, and more power to him. Yeah.
I'd love to interview him. I hope he listens to this and he can see that I'm serious about what I do and ask questions and hopefully give you the floor to feel comfortable and talk. Because I'd love to hear his take on things. And was it planned? Was Blabbermouth the plan, or did it just take off? That's what I'd love to know.
Yeah. I wonder if you did that time machine thing, if you went back and looked at like early Blabbermouths, they might be a little less sensationalistic. I feel like it was. I actually reviewed records there in 2001 for a little while, just as a reviewer, and I think he paid. I remember him paying.
There you go.
So yeah, I do feel it like it started a little more underground, music based than it became, because then he started covering things like Kiss and Aerosmith, and I'm fans of the early material by all both of those bands, but it became a little British in its leanings, I guess I'll say.
Yeah, copy. Yeah, I hear you. Who was which person that you interviewed or met or interacted with that's got a profile really surprised you? You had low expectations or no expectations, and you met them and went, holy shit, that's great. They're great.
Oh man, a lot of people. I think Michael from Opeth, I've been following them since the first album, but when I finally got some communication with him, which is really only around Blackwater Park, actually, I thought, this guy's everything that's advertised and more. I just think this is one of the best ambassadors for creative, progressive metal out there. He knows his history, whether it's TNT from Norway, who I'm a huge fan of, and he's a huge fan of, whether it's early obscure 70s prog, also something I'm really interested in, that he's interested in. Like, I just felt like this guy's a huge fan of music. And he's also a visionary in terms of he knows what he wants for his band. Like Opeth or not, they have something that no other band has. And so he was somebody that I felt was one of the most laudable and impressive people I think I'd met in this journey, for sure. Yeah. There's so many, man. And there's so many, You always hear about like, oh, I met this guy. He was so nice, And while there are exceptions to that rule, I've been struck by how many people in our world, in our metal world, are truly just some really great people. Yeah. Really, really, really good people. I've known this for decades now. The people I've talked to, I would say that I'm consistently impressed with most of the musicians that I've talked to and interacted with. So there's very few exceptions. And I mean, even not to go back to my fire and all that, but like, I went through the most devastating period of my life 5 months ago, and the people that came out of the woodwork, a lot of those were either musicians I had something to do with that I haven't for a long time. And they just came out of the woodwork and wished me well in the most genuine and empathetic way. And I thought, man, what a community we have. I mean, really, really great people out there. I'm not sure if that's even what you're getting at with your question, but I'm continually impressed with the amount of goodness that's out there in people in this world, and I think that always we need to be reminded of that, because I think there's still people on the outside that feel like this is just a bunch of reprobates creating noise, Yeah. We've always known it's way deeper than that. But you're not going to find kinder people than a lot of the metal folks out there.
You're not wrong. And it's one of the reasons that I have taken to evangelizing. I think that's the right way of framing it, extreme metal, because of the reasons you just articulated. Good, kind-hearted souls. Many live that deontological or Christian ethic, even if they don't subscribe to it as a philosophy. They just live that ethic naturally. And it's important to fly that flag, if you like, because to your point, when you're hurting, when you're going through things that are causing you to think twice about, what plan is there for me in this earth, that sort of thing. And it's nice to know that you got the support of people, and they happen to be people whose music you appreciate or whatever. That just doubles it.
Absolutely. I mean, and I have a following from what I've done with my books, with everything I've done, even post Maniacs. And when we started a GoFundMe, Day of the Fire, because we needed socks, we needed underwear, we didn't have anything. The amount of people from my, I guess what I'll call following, it was astonishing. I didn't know. I mean, I knew that I got recognized at a show 5 days ago at the Atheist show here in Greensboro by some fan of mine. I put fan in quotes. Because I'm just a super fan myself, so it's weird to have fans of me. I just consider myself a fan, but to know how many there are out there, if they're not fans of mine, they're just what's the word I'm looking for? Friends and just peers in this business, in this thing we do. It was astonishing to me how many people remembered me, and at a time when I needed it the most, and my family needed it the most. Yeah, I'll take it. And it really just reminded me how good this community is, and I'm glad to be reminded of that. It kind of for a terrible reason, but I'll take it. Yeah. I'm hearing you.
Yeah. Hey, just talking about the writers that you shared the magazine with. So you had some incredible writers there, and were very, very impressionable on me as a young fella. When I was still to this day, when I'm writing, I think about all those magazines that I read, just stacked end on end. Craig, Zahler, Chris, yourself, and Pascal, and Mike in particular were the ones that I remember reading, and just, if it was you, right? I think might have been through you, I got into Bork Nagar, and there was all sorts of bands that you wrote about. But same thing with Zahler. He was a drummer, I remember, and used to write about the drummer's perspective all of the time. So was it a case, I'm not going to use a word like mentorship, did you just give these guys free rein to do whatever they wanted, and you just proofread it and away it went?
Well, in a way. It turned out when I got there that it seemed like Mike kind of had his guys. Like Thomas Pasquale was his guy. There was a guy later that came on named Ron Strauss, who I never even met in person, but that was Mike's guy. Mike would kind of find these guys, however. And then I had my guys, and I'll admit, man, the first day I got there, I had an agenda. I really did, because I just knew that this was my job. This is the job for me. I can do something good here, And I knew that I wanted Chris Maycock in there, who's since become known as Professor Black, Chris Black, High Spirits, Dawnbringer, all that. I knew I wanted him because I had read his fanzine when he interned at Relapse when I was at Relapse. So I had my eye on Chris Maycock really early, and I knew I wanted to bring him into the magazine immediately. Even before I got there my first day, but I knew I had the job. I had up here in my head, I was like, I'm bringing Chris Maycock onto this magazine. Same thing with Marty Rickinen. I read his Worm Gear fanzine, really liked it, brought him on. because I was reading a lot of fanzines at that time, and I knew who was out there, who I liked, and who might really be a good fit for Maniacs. Zahler is one of my proudest ones because not only did he become a great writer and now a great filmmaker, but he's one of my very, very best friends. And he and I got very close during my time at Maniacs. And I remember, I'll never forget sitting there waiting for a subway and reading a copy of the fanzine Steel Dissector that he had sent us for review in the fanzine column. And I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, he's slagging off Bathory, Bloodfire, Death. He's slagging off Celtic Frost, Morbid Tales, or Celtic Frost, excuse me. He's slagging off a lot of stuff. He's killing sacred cows. But the way, and that would usually like upset me, or I'd be like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The way he did it was so eloquent and so educated, because he'd also give reasons why how could this be better? Well, I think Morbid Tales could be better because of this reason. Again, I might have totally disagreed. In fact, I think I do to this day with him on that one. But his writing was so good and so captivating, even at that early stage that I remember before the subway even came, I was like, I'm getting this guy. I'm calling this guy tomorrow. Going to get him on Maniacs. And he was, of course, a Maniacs reader, and he was thrilled to get a job. I actually gave him his first paying writing job. And he's still grateful for that, apparently. It's just, that's how it happened. It happened organically, but I would bring in whoever I wanted. And Mike would trust me. And we had a pretty strong clutch of writers at that point. Yeah.
Well, were there any duds?
Yeah, but I'm not going to call them out.
Oh, so they actually their copy was printed.
Yeah. There was one guy. He was one of Mike's guys, and he wrote a lot in the magazine. And I thought when we got his pieces raw, it just took so much work to hammer together to make it editable. I don't want guys like that. Like I do want to edit. I do want to like just shape things up if I need to, or check facts or whatever. But this guy was just such a mess. I thought, I don't have the kind of time. Like we were running a very busy schedule every issue. I mean, it was crazy. And this guy took way too much editing. I talked with Mike about it, but he was loyal to this dude for whatever reason. But yeah, there were a couple duds. There were people he picked that got printed in the magazine that I didn't care for. I thought they seemed uninformed compared to some of my guys. Or girls. Spider was one I brought on. Stephen O'Malley was a friend of mine, and I brought him on as a writer. I really wanted him to do the Dark Throne piece that he eventually did, because it just seemed to make sense. I knew him from his Descent fanzine, which was a largely black metal fanzine. But yeah, no, there was definitely a couple duds. Yes. So I can't name names.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, and it wasn't great. I remember the reading Mike's tribute to you, saying that you're going, and he couldn't believe you were leaving either. If you recall what he wrote, he was just saying, "Okay, this is not what we want, but it's something that Jeff wants." So fair enough. On he goes, and the introduction of Liz happened then. So can you share the reasons behind why you left Metal Maniacs?
Yeah, it was not an easy choice. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. It was definitely the dream job. I've had some great jobs before and since. Before that, I worked for Relapse. It was awesome. Great time to be at Relapse. Great memories. My time at Inside Out Music from 2014 to 19 was great. A big prog fan, and to work there intimately with some of the bands and the guy that runs the show, it's fantastic. But Metal Maniacs will always be the unbeatable job. You just can't get a better job than that. And I'm also glad that I made an impact while at that job. And that to me is a bit, if I have any legacy, that's a huge part of it, And so I had met a girl who moved from LA. She was working for Century Media in LA. She was a German who came over to the US in 91 to help start the US operations for Century Media. I met her. Her name was Tanya Shore. and we fell in love. She moved from LA to New York. She was in New York. We were in New York together for 4 years. We both started to really hate the amount of people we had to be around for me to work in New York. We eventually moved out to a farm in New Jersey to get away from people. But, we wanted a little more elbow room in how we lived. And it's almost impossible in the New York metropolitan area to get that. And we were just kind of tired of traffic, tired of people, tired of millions of people being around us. And we just wanted a different lifestyle. So you can't get that there. So we knew we were going to move south to the country somewhere. And she knew I wasn't quite ready to leave when we started talking about it, but that I would eventually agree to go. But we found a place in Virginia that was too good to be true. We found it earlier than we ever expected. So I had to kind of like move my timeline up a little bit. But the thing that helped me leave was that the publishing company, Sterling McFadden, I hail them for supporting this kind of magazine as long as they did. Because we were definitely the black sheep of that entire magazine stable, whether it was Tiger Beat or Metal Edge or whatever, like Metal Maniacs was this ugly stepchild of a magazine, and they supported the shit out of it. It was great. But I do have to say that they were really frustrating to work with, because if you look at the layouts, they're dated. I always wanted them to change it up and get something better going, get something a little more, pleasing to the eye. I had ideas, and they just would never ever implement them because that wasn't my job. They had graphic artists, and the graphic artists that worked on Maniacs worked on the wrestling magazine, and they worked on the soap opera magazine, and they worked, they had a lot of magazines under their stable, and these people would just churn them out. So it's that's why Maniacs kind of looked the way it did. And I never really liked the look, and I wanted it to change. I wanted to get in there and go, this could be better. This could be even better than it is. And they just wouldn't really listen, again, because I was in my stable. I this is your job. You're doing it great. We don't want you to mess with the graphic artists or bother them too much about things. I was like, okay. And then when the internet came to be a thing, they were so cheap or so suspicious of what the internet was and what their employees were going to do with it, that we didn't have internet access at our computers yet. And I'm talking 99, 2000. We had an internet station that was in the middle of the room, of this big room. And I always had to look over from my desk and go, oh, the internet station's free. I can hop on there and do some emails. That's insane. Yeah. It sounds so primitive to us now. But even then it was behind the times. I'd tell people about it that were like working at, other magazines or labels or whatever. And they couldn't believe it, I know that eventually changed there, but it was sort of this resistance to move with the times effectively that I became just so frustrated with. That started to almost eclipse how fun and rewarding the job itself was this like resistance to new technology to give us the tools we needed to do what we had to do. It was weird. And so that certainly helped hasten my leaving because I was just frustrated. I felt like with the tools that were given to me, I did the best that I could. And then I hit a wall. So I was okay with leaving, I was looking at a new adventure, moving down to 24 acres in Virginia. It was a decent trade-off, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Very hard decision though. Very, very hard decision.
Okay. That puts to end decades of speculation that I had, because it was probably maybe 12 months after you left that I started to tune out of metal altogether. And I think by that stage, the Slipknot thing had just become so all fucking pervasive. And I was so despondent with some of the sounds that were coming through with Kill Switch Engage, and you could just see what was happening. When I say proper metal of yours and my cloth was going to be marginalised yet again. as this stuff, and I don't hate it. I want to be clear here, but it's not my thing. And these days, Killswitch Engage just supported Maiden in Brisbane Entertainment Centre, for God's sake. So everything's coming full circle and merging and meshing. And I think Limp Bizkit are supporting Metallica. I think I'm right in saying that. It's just
wow,
fucking. It's all smashed to pieces into smithereens, and you'll have Opeth supporting bloody Taylor Swift next. Maybe not that far, but I mean, nothing's off the table is my point. And
not anymore. No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, but it was when you left, it felt like the end of an era. And that's nothing on Liz either, because I do business with her and her husband at the moment with Split PR. They're fantastic. So they have some wonderful bands coming through their PR company at the moment. So
this is great. I thought Mike made a good choice.
Yeah. Oh, no, she's fantastic. Yeah, I think it was just I could sense that the record companies and the big magazines were getting behind another movement again. And this was still, to your very well made point, this was still pre-internet. So the internet didn't really become the thing until this thing took off. 2006 and 7 when the smartphone came in. Prior to that, it wasn't. We still read magazines, but which meant that they could still, the labels and the advertising companies and the magazines could still collude to, remember Jet and the bands, the Hives, the Fuckheads, and all the rest of it. And you just knew this. You just knew this stuff was coming, and you just get so despondent with it. But then I'm really grateful that the internet has democratized things and made it possible for me, someone like me, to have a podcast that's listened to a lot of people and the like. But yeah, I just wanted to give you that feedback too. I remember when you left, and it's no slight on Liz at all. I think apart from her effusive praise of that bloody awful Megadeth album, The World Needs a Hero, which I disagree with. Do you remember that? She came in really strong.
Well, you brought that up in the Mike G interview that you did, and I thought, man, I didn't know she had championed that album. But look, I've been guilty of championing albums that are not well liked at all. So I get it, man. She can fly her freak flag with that one.
Yeah. It just says it like the Dave Mustaine thing. I was talking to Mike Williams, of course, who did some work in Metal Maniacs in the 90s, and he was talking about how he was sick of reading about Dave Mustaine's deodorant habits or whatever they might have been, because we all love Megadeth, but enough's enough, for God's sakes. To your really well made point earlier, this is a magazine that champions these types of bands, and Megadeth they certainly are one of our bands, but they weren't leading their best life during that period. So
no, not at all. Having
to listen to Mustaine complain about Metallica and Lars in particular again and again was just enough. We just had enough, I think, by that point. But I've just had a memory come in. Did you interview Jason Newsted? Was that you?
No, that was Mike. I have interviewed Jason since for the Voivod book, but I didn't interview him back in the day. I think that was Mike.
Yeah, that was a very good interview, that one, because it highlighted Reload had just come out. So this is late 97 or early 98. See, we used to get the magazines about 3 months after they were released here. Just keep right. So to say July or something like that, and we'd be reading it well into October or November.
Sure.
But I remember an interview, and if it was Mike, the writer or the interviewer made the point of singling Jason out and saying, whilst people don't like Metallica, they like you. And that was a very good example of what the magazine specialised in. It. The nuance, the magazine, you guys got the nuance that metal fans were looking for?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think so. And of course, every one of those fans is going to be different from one to the other in terms of their opinions and their likes. But, we had a lot of feedback because we get letters and we print the letters, and even before the internet and everybody having that kind of voice there, we got enough feedback where we kind of knew our audience. We knew what people wanted. And Jason had cred in a time when the rest of his band maybe didn't. In our world, you know what I mean? Despite Jason being on some pretty bad Metallica records, it always felt like Jason kept it as true as possible. I'm certain he would have loved to be more of a creative element in that band. He just wasn't given the chance. It's a shame, because he came from a band where he drove the whole damn thing, man. He wrote that whole first Flotsam record. That's formidable. And then he's not that kind of writer. It's a little weird. And I feel like, and his jump to Voivod, I think, he knew that wasn't a cash cow, but he put his cash into it, and he did it as long as he could. And then, of course, Piggy died, and, that whole thing came to an end. But, you know, I feel like Jason is a man of great integrity, great passion. I have nothing but respect for him. And to your point, I think it, you know, it makes sense that we would have highlighted him in a time when maybe an interview with Lars wouldn't have landed very well with the audience that we were writing to, where Jason did. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Looking back, okay, do you feel as though? Actually, no. I'll ask a different question. What are the chances of? It's about 15 years or so. It's a bit longer than that, but I'll just talk about the 15 years that I'm aware of the band's existence, of the content being digitized. And I think I did ask Mike a question around that, but do you know whether that can even happen?
It can happen. We certainly have the technology. The magazines are out there. And you mean like the old issues being preserved?
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Because there's such crucial writing in there that needs to be preserved.
I would love to do that. I think you're right. I think it'd be a project. I don't know who would take it on, but I'd love to see it happen. I mean, I kept every issue of my run that's now been destroyed by smoke and water damage in the fire. But I'm sure somebody else has a complete set that you would just have to sit down and scan every page and do it that way. That's all it really take. And then having, of course, a central site that people can go to see that. I'd love to see the entire run, you know, from Mike G's first issue all the way up to Liz's last issue. I think it'd be great. To your point, I think just preserving some of the writing. You know, there was really good writing in Maniacs. I think I don't want people to forget that. I think we had a really good stable of writers who were. It was just exciting to read because you had personality from one person to the next. You know what I mean? Like Sue Knowles didn't sound like Marty Rickin, and Marty Rikkinen didn't sound like Borivoj, who didn't sound like, you know, Stephen O'Malley. You know, and the list goes on and on. And yeah, I'd love to see that happen, man. I'm surprised it hasn't because, you know, less popular magazines have been digitized. Certainly the big favorite fanzines like Slayer and Iston have. But I'd sure like to see Maniacs. Yeah,
it should happen.
Maybe I'll head that up.
Yeah. I think somebody's got to do it. From memory, when I was talking to Mike, I can't remember if I left this in the chat or not, but he was saying Paul Gargano might have the answer to that question because I think he might have bought the masthead.
Or I remember in the aughts somewhere, 2008 maybe, something like that, I had a little contact with Paul, who of course I knew because he was Metal Edge at the time I was at Maniacs. And so we had desks pretty close to each other. And so, yeah, he did tell me that he bought the name. Then I think, do you know Mark Riddick? They've done art over the years. The Riddick brothers.
Right. Yes, you're right.
They did an online. They tried to do an online Maniacs version, and I'm not sure if that was before Paul bought the name or after. I don't know where that comes in there, but it didn't really go well. But yes, at some point I understood that Paul had the name, and I remember telling him, like, look, if you ever do anything with it, I'd love to be a part. You know my history here. And he said he would, and then nothing ever came of it. So yeah, I don't know if he still owns the name. Although if you're digitizing and just storing past information, I don't think it would matter one way or the other if he owned the name. I think you could still use it simply because you're documenting a history, something from the past. You know, I don't think you could stop.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I'm talking about, an archive. Not starting it. I don't think you can start it up again. Things have been splintered and fractured too much. And the irony is, Metal Maniacs or an alumni from Metal Maniacs does dominate the scene still with Bori. So that's taken.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, if Metal Maniacs started up again, if Paul sold me the name, just for instance, or whatever, or somebody, I would want to see it as a print magazine. And that's an even more of an uphill battle. You know, I would hate to see it relegated to just being another fucking online source. You know, it's probably not needed. I think if you could make a great print magazine out of it, that'd be really cool. It would probably have some degree of audience, but yeah, it'll never be what it was. You know, I mean, because look, I grew up in small town Iowa or Iowa City in college, and I would go to the grocery store and all the big magazines were on the newsstand. and you could pick up this weird ass magazine called Metal Maniacs and see an article on Rotting Christ of all people. Like it was a bit of a subversive magazine simply because it had such mainstream distribution, yet it was covering this stuff that otherwise wasn't getting any of that. And I think that time has passed now. You know what I mean? Like we don't necessarily need that because somebody in small town Iowa now can just dial it up in their phone and order the new Rotting Christ album or stream it or whatever. It's just, it's different times, Be nice to see, but it's a pipe dream. Although I think your archive idea is fantastic. Yeah.
I hope it happens. Yeah, I know I gave all of mine to with great love and generosity. When I say generosity, I wanted my my ex-girlfriend's nephew to have all of my copies of Guitar World, Bass Player, Metal Maniacs, and he took it and ran with it. But last time I had anything to do with him was 20 years ago, but he was thrilled to get it all. So I know I passed it on to good hands. But look, I don't have any of the stuff I grew up with. I gave it all away. That's my point. And I'd love to read it all over again. Not so much for nostalgia's sake, even though that's good unto itself. I'd love to reconnect with the articles and the bands, and reading Zahler go on about Arcturus and these are the bands. That was the gateway. And these days it's very. I'm trying to think. Like someone asked me not too long ago, who are the good new death and black metal bands? I went, shit, I don't know. I don't know. I've got a new music show as well. I don't know, but immediately my mind goes back to Bork Nagar and Arcturus as the newer band. I know they're not newer bands, by the way, but I'm just saying that's where my mind goes. So I'd love to go back and see what other old gems. And here's the point: other old gems I missed because I just glossed over them or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I'm every now and then I'll still find something that I overlooked. There's a Norwegian band. I think they only had one album called Kvist, Kvist.
Yeah.
I think it's since been reissued on Peaceville. Like I didn't pay any attention to that when it came out because, there was so much coming out of that type that you didn't have time for one. But yeah, I'm constantly rediscovering things from, the past. I'm kind of with you though. Well, I can't speak for you, but I'd be hard pressed to name a whole bunch of new black/death/ quote unquote extreme metal bands that I think are great. I think there's a lot of good ones out there. I think technique apparently is easier to come by these days. Absolutely. Like I think these bands come out fully formed. You don't get the raw early album that just sounds like crap, but there's spirit in there, and then they tinker a little bit for the second album. Then by the third or fourth or fifth album, they find it. Like these bands are coming out with debut albums that sound like they've been around forever. Yes. And I think that's partly just learning the instrument is different these days. I think you talked about it a little bit with Oliver Amberg, if I'm not mistaken. You kind of hit on that thing of young bands and young musicians having a different sort of approach nowadays. And also just like, they're to me, new bands are great, but they're all variations on a theme. I think it's hard to be innovative anymore when, we've had the innovation, I think, reach a peak in the mid 90s with some of these European bands. And certainly, in the aughts and even in the teens, there have been some real great innovators. But I think by and large, you're getting variations on a theme, Crip Sermon. They're a really good band at what they're doing. Is it anything original? Not at all, and I have a friend in that band, but, they're really good at what they're doing. I miss the journey. I miss the creative journey that you'd get with bands where you don't know what you're getting from album to album, and I think the freedom to explore, isn't what it used to be. I feel like you kind of know what you're getting with some of these new bands, and you'll always know what you're getting. It's just there's less risk taking. There's less going off that cliff. There are less 34.788% completes. There are less La Masquerade Infernals. There's less of that type of exploration. I don't know why, it just doesn't seem that there's much taste for it anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you. The stuff that Liz and that I get sent from Earsplit's very good, and Sentient Ruin too have very good stuff too. It's very underground though. It's not innovative. It's just dirgy, satanic underground stuff that I've still got a hankering for. But Faceless Burial from Melbourne are very good as well, I've got to say. But God, I was going to make a point that's flown away from me. What was it? Never mind. I'll come back to. Oh yeah, I had an answer for you. Now we were both. I wasn't. I was in an office job at the time, so I pretty much tuned out of metal. But I think I have an answer why bands don't take risks anymore, and that's wrapped up in Elude Divinum Insanus. So people saw, people saw that. I've spoken to Trey's mum about that. That ruined him. That's what I want people to understand, is that he was despondent after that. He was so disappointed at the flack that he'd copped. And I know Carl from Nile had been on the front foot about that too, and saying that, I'm just standing up for my mate here, that sort of thing. But I know that was a very much, it's an album that has 5 straight-ahead death metal songs that would fit on Heretic or what have you, but I think they were written by the Merkskull guitarist that was in the band at the time. But the point is, there was some pretty odd shit on that album that did not fit just Morbid Angel, but extreme metal or what have you. But I have a feeling that bands and labels and managers in particular saw what happened to the god of guitar playing in extreme metal. There's nobody else. There's him and Chuck's not around these days. There's just Trey.
Right.
And saw what happened to him and said, effectively, if you're going to experiment, leave it to the farting in a bathtub Mike Patton stuff on the weird sub-label that nobody gives a shit about, or release direct to YouTube. Because I totally agree with you. It's that Wes Hauck from Alluvial aside, there's just not a lot of innovation going on. There's just variations on theme.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. And I'm sure there are others out there that are trying to do some very different avant-garde things. It's out there. I just don't think it's as fertile or as convincing as a lot of the stuff that I hold up as the most pioneering of metal bands ever, which is all that post-black metal from Norway. I mean, let's run down the list: Beyond Dawn, In the Woods, Arcturus, Fluidity. And the list goes on and on. I think that's where you had perhaps the most daring stuff coming out, and also being artistically successful, if not commercially. I think with something like the Morbid Angel album you're citing, I absolutely applaud what they tried to do on that. I don't love it. I'm a Morbid Angel fan. I didn't love it. So I'm not going to like everything necessarily that's weird or different or progressive. It's got to be good. And I applaud the reach that they tried to make there. It's just too bad it didn't work out for them. But we are in a metal culture right now that kind of just wants what's expected, I think, of newer bands or of old bands writing the same album over and over, Obituary or whatever. The shit's pretty good. It's just, you're not getting anything new. I mean, bands are hitting walls, and now they're a lot of them are existing just to play festivals or shows, and they're playing the old album in its entirety, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of nostalgia there too. And I get it. And I think it's fun for the young kids who didn't get to see it first time around. But old fogies like me, I've been there, and I have some grumbles about the lack of creativity that some of these legacy bands are showing. So I have a lot of opinions. It's probably another interview or a private discussion, but yeah.
No, I'm with you, mate. I think we're on exactly the same page, and because we came from the same era, I believe that's why. I've spoken to Dino about this with Fear Factory. It's as long as the IP associated with the branding is the most important thing with a band these days. Look at the Nevermore guys are getting back together with 1 or 2 original members there, and they're actively recruiting. It's like, is it Nevermore or what the fuck is it? I don't know.
I mean, what right? Is that new Pantera? I don't think so.
No, it's not. That's the point. And I made a point of not going and watching it because I never saw the real Pantera. And I don't have any. I've spoken to Zach a bunch of times. Have at 'em, guys. Go ahead and do it. But it's not something that it's not about comfort. It's just, I don't want to see Metallica or Pantera in their current gears these days. There's other, I'm going to see Cam Lee in 3 days' time.
Right. Yeah.
I quite like what he's doing because he's trying to reclaim what he lost there for decades. I like that. There's some fire and some vigor, and he's saying, this is mine, and he's got this rivalry now with Rick, and it feels a bit like the old days.
Right. Yeah, no, that's all good with me. I know what you mean. It's weird. It's weird. I haven't seen Metallica live since Reload at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, exactly the same. Yep.
And that was good. I was like, that's cool. I'm good. Because look, I saw him back in the day with Cliff. I mean, I'm lucky enough to say that. And sorry, they can't touch themselves. Metallica early 86 was a peak,
right there. That's probably the peak of any metal band, by the way. That one.
Unbelievable. Same as Slayer. So, I sound like an old fogey saying it, but those bands certainly, I love that they have a legacy. I love that they kept it going so long. But we have to be honest, like the peaks were early, creatively, I think, in my opinion. And there have been others holding up the flag for creativity in metal that aren't getting near the coverage that Metallica still gets. And that's, that to me, I get Metallica earned it, but let's try to focus on real musical achievement, and 72 seasons is not it. It just isn't, but whatever, again, that's very subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very subjective.
I'm definitely not of the postmodern school of, your truth, my truth, and everybody's got their own truth. I do believe that there is a subjective truth, and that truth is at the moment that Metallica aren't a very good band at all. They're a brand, and they get up on stage and perform, and they get paid an absolute fucking fortune for it. They sold out Lang Park or Suncorp Stadium here. I don't know what the equivalent is there in the States, but it'd be like an NFL oval, our rugby league oval here. So 50,000 people, they could have sold that over 5 or 6 times over. There's a waiting list that long. Same thing with, have you heard of this band called Falling in Reverse? Have you heard of that before?
Heard the name. I just don't know anything about it.
Same here, but apparently they sold out the entertainment centre about 20 times over. Such was the list that was waiting. Like you and I have no doubt I did, and I have no doubt you did too. How long did you wait for the Birmingham tickets to go on sale for the final Black Sabbath thing? I was there for as soon as I could get on to try to fly over there. I was prepared to pay the $8,000 or whatever it was.
Really? Okay. They're a top 3 band for me, and I wasn't. So that shows you how curmudgeonly I am these days.
I just
only because I just don't think we're going to get like a great Ozzy performance for one. I'm a little worried about that. I prefer to just. I still go to live shows, but I'm not. I don't know. I'm not vying for tickets for stuff like that anymore.
I made an exception to that one because it was the only time I'll see all 4 on stage.
Well, then you do it. Yeah, I was lucky enough to see that original lineup once when they did the U.S. and Pantera opened, and I'm glad, glad they did it. And I got to see Bill Ward play with them. Very important. Yeah. So I don't blame you at all for trying to get tickets. Apparently, you did not, right?
No, definitely not. We tried. It was very glitchy. Live Nation's platform online is absolute bullshit for a start. And you think you've got a ticket, and then you go through to check out, and it doesn't let you check out. So this happened multiple times, and it's not like I've got the money to do it either. But my wife just said, "Look, you're not going to. This is it. Ozzy's basically literally in. I'm not a euphemism, but literally in a retirement home these days. He's falling over himself. It's, to your point, you'll be lucky if we get 3 songs out of him. I get that. But the spectacle, the event, the opportunity to catch up with some people that I've become friendly with through the course of the podcast, just about all of my audience is either in your part of the world or in the UK. So the opportunity to do that combined with a momentous occasion like that, I didn't see Cliff, you see. I was way too young. But just to be able to say I've seen all 4 and been part of that spectacle, I could have siphoned the money away from the mortgage for that.
For sure. Look, it's Black Sabbath, man. They're the kings. They're the founders. They, I can say so much. Plus, I'm one of those Sabbath fans. I love the Dio stuff. I love the Gillan album. I love Eternal Idol. Like, yep. I think Tony Iommi's the god in my world, and I wouldn't blame anybody for trying to see that show, because that's, it's also a miracle that they're all four alive. Think of all the deaths we've had, in this, the original Motorhead, the classic three, they're all gone, So it's kind of a minor miracle that all of the original Sabbath four are still alive, and it's not going to be like that for very long. So why not try to see them in the flesh if you haven't? That's a rite of passage. That's Mecca for us, right? So I'm glad they're doing it on that score. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm mindful that we've been talking for almost 2 hours. So with whatever time we've got left, I'll hand the floor over to you. Insofar as I've also been writing biographies and writing books as well. We've got that in common. And I haven't read any of your books yet, but I look forward to. I know you've done the Fates Warning book and you've done other things. You mentioned the Borivoj book as well, but I really look forward to diving into that as well. But what do you want to share with us about your writing, your long form writing?
Well, I had always wanted to write a book way back in the day, but there didn't seem to be much infrastructure for it in the late 90s. I think Martin Popoff was one of the only guys doing metal writing in book form. It was hard to find books then, but I think I had the inkling to do it because it was at that point, right around 2000, where metal started to get old enough to have enough age, had 3 decades behind it, where you could start to look at it historically, right, and start to compile things and look at it in hindsight and document it. So I knew that I would want to do that, and just the opportunity came up when Ian Christie, author of Sound of the Beast, as well as a number of other accomplishments, he started Bazillion Points, the publishing company. And he approached me because he had for years, we had kind of joked that, you need to write a progressive metal book and I need to publish it. And I said, well, that's great, but I haven't written the book and you don't have a publishing company. But, he finally informed it, and he offered for me to be one of the first books on his list. So that was a dream come true, to write Mean Deviation. And then it was about the right subject, because I've always been interested in the very progressive and left field and pioneering sort of innovative stuff. That's a major fascination of mine. And then, I just found the process fascinating. It's a huge freaking project, as you know. It's like writing a term paper, but one that takes 2 to 3 years to write. It's a very, very laborious job, but it's rewarding as hell, and I enjoy it. So then I decided I would try my hand at self-publishing, because I saw what it took to do a book. And I think the infrastructure by 2014, when Soul on Fire came out, which is the Peter Steele biography, I felt like I could try my hand at self-publishing. And while it is a whole lot more work, I think it's the way to go, at least for me. Because my stuff's always going to be kind of niche, and the people that want it will find it. You don't have to worry about going into Barnes and Noble; you just buy it direct, and it's really I don't think it's hurt my sales. So that was a success, and then I just do shit I want to see on the shelf. I mean, there's not a Fates Warning book, so I'm going to write it, and I know it's not going to land me on the bestseller list, but I think that band deserves their book. I as a fan, I want to read that book, so then I'm going to make that book. It was the same thing with Peter Steele. There wasn't a Peter Steele book out, and I couldn't believe there wasn't a Peter Steele book out. I researched, I looked, I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. And then again with Voivod, Martin Popoff did do Worlds Away, the hardcover book which mostly focused on Away's art. I want to do more of a comprehensive musical focused biography, which I worked on for years, and I'm finally sending it to the printer in about a month, and they'll soon publicly announce it for real. But that was a labor of love as well, and they're always labor of loves. I don't think about how much I can sell. I know I'll sell enough to make it worth my while, but it's wanting to see that book on the shelf, and I just love the process. But I honestly, after 4 books, I'm a little bit exhausted with the process, and I want to do something different after this. I'm not sure what it'll be, but I'm continuing with Radical Research, my podcast, which I really enjoy doing. We got a nice little enclave of people that listen to us faithfully or from around the world. That's more than a podcast can ask these days, because as you know, there's a lot of podcasts out there vying for attention. Yours is a great one. I'd like to think mine is really good, but I enjoy doing that, and so I'm going to keep doing it as long as I possibly can. So.
Yeah, I don't think I could have articulated it better, mate. Yeah, you said it again. Yeah, so much. Yeah, it's just you've been a trailblazer and of the self-publishing route too is the one that I've gone down as well. It certainly will be the way that I go down with the Cradle of Filth book. And look, the key thing to that is I just don't want to have any compromise around it. I am working with the former band members on this one, so I don't.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, whoever might be, those publishing houses, but I've been an in-house writer before, and I understand the types of compromise you've got to go through, and I don't think I'm prepared to. I don't take the sort of pride that means that I can't see that happens. As a journalist, you hand it over to an editor who cuts it to pieces anyway, and so for news media, I'm talking about. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm not worried about that, but there's important points that an editor may remove that actually. Other points later in the book or even beforehand, but it's all set up in such a way and structured, particularly, and I think you'll understand this point completely, is that as a fan as well as a journalist and as a writer, it's structured in such a way that it all has to be intact. The house, if you remove that brick, it's an important part of the foundation and it can crumble. And the Cradle of Filth book, it is, again, applying that deontological principle that I talked about earlier about truth, not being the postmodern thing of your truth, my truth, and everybody's got their own. There is a central truth, and the central truth about Cradle of Filth is Danny's always been in the band. The question then is why?
Right.
And this is where you get to it. And I know you would have done something similar with your books as well to make it really compelling. And I understand there's got to be elements of tension and conflict in there, but not unnecessarily so. But after that, after I've said all of that, though, I do feel like as though there is a real lack of, I don't want to frame it academic, scholarly, maybe is a better word. I don't know, but you think you know where I'm headed. You're doing it. I like to think I'm doing it. I'm on that pathway. But why don't you think more metal writers have gone down the pathway you and I are?
Why have they not? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's only a few of us. I mean, you and I, we're talking to each other, and then you mentioned pop. There's only a couple.
I think it's can't answer that. I don't know. I wish there were more. I don't know if Blabbermouth / classic rock culture has just embedded itself too deeply into the consciousness, and people think that's how you have to present oneself. Maybe. I don't know if I feel like I'm stabbing it in the dark there, but I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you. I don't.
It's an observation, and hey, look, the lane's right open. I'm grateful. Okay, because I know I sold more than what I anticipated on my last book that came out, and an unnamed black metal musician who had a lot to do with the scene in Norway, written his book, and it's important that I'm framing it as this way: the stories they're getting further and further in the rearview mirror. Okay, so It's actually really important that we understand. This is why I'm doing the Cradle book now, because I want Paul to have some input, both Pauls really, but Paul Ryan in particular to have some input, because he was crucial in that. He was the catalyst. I
look forward to reading that. I think that'll be a great read. I'd be very interested in that. Yeah,
it's based on the conversations that I've had, absolutely, but then it goes far deeper. It's really it interrogates it. It interrogates key aspects because, as I say, Danny's been in this fucking band the entire time. And hey, look, as you well know, people share things with you and they go, I don't want that to get out there. I don't put it out there. But I would love to say why certain members do not want to go on record. And I know, and I'm sure you have some idea about why people don't want to go on record, but I won't do it to them. I won't hurt them because I know it would hurt them. And I'm not in that. So, but you can you can still address the unspeakable. You can still do it. You've just got to use your skill as a writer.
Yeah. Well, we should do a book trade. I've got Soul on Fire and the Fates book here. We should trade. Yeah, if you're up for it.
Yeah, I'll send you this. I'll send it to you. So
there you go. Yes. Let's talk offline about that. I gotta go. I gotta try to get out of here in about 15 minutes to meet my wife at the coast. So it's our first vacation since the ordeal.
Well, thank you for your time, Jeff. I really appreciate it, mate. It's I've been a fan of yours and your writing for a long time. So, this has been a tremendous conversation. I don't know where 2 hours goes when we're having these sort of chats, but I just find
I know. We could probably do it for hours, and I hope we get to meet in person sometime. And I just want to thank you for it, because it's, I get asked for interviews every now and then, but it's usually about my books. But to have somebody come to me about Maniacs, I mean, I do meet people that remember me from Maniacs, definitely, but your enthusiasm just reminds me that what we did back then was not all for naught. It's still remembered and it's still treasured. And I'm so grateful for that. And man, you have a great idea with I hope anybody listening, maybe somebody out there would be up for the task of scanning all those pages and putting it all together for posterity. I think it'd be fantastic. Not just my era, certainly the Catherine era is huge, and Liz's as well. So let's see if that happens someday.
Well, thank you very much. I'll let you head off, mate. And look, let's
stay in touch. Let's trade books. And thanks again, man.
Thank you, brother. Have a great one. Enjoy. You
do a great job with what you're doing. Cheers.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Take care.
Well, there you have it. A conversation with Jeff Wagner, former editor of Metal Maniacs. I really enjoyed that one, and I hope a few more conversations are on the horizon with Jeff, because God knows it sounds like we could talk for hours on end. Got a lot in common, and there's still so many more questions that I have for him about his tenure with that great masthead. Let's hope somebody indeed resurrects it, or at least, at the very least, digitizes past issues and makes them available, because the writing was absolutely peerless. Only Terrorizer came close, and Terrorizer is a very good magazine as well from the United Kingdom. All right, that's it from me. My name's Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I'm the host of Scars and Guitars. Until the next one, it's a goodbye for now.